Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the INTP stream. Sorry, every time I've started these, my music has been on in the background. Okay, um, I'm deviating from the series I've been kind of working on tonight, hammering out, trying to get this posted. Working on a series about, starting an MBTI concept, and the MBTI concept is well, it's the difference between TE and TI, right? These are very different functions. They're they're both thinking functions. They're both grounded in logic and consideration of objective metrics of evidence and everything else. They're both thinking functions. The Jungian distinction between extroversion and introversion with regard to thinking, although the introversion extroversion designation is different for each of the other sensing, intuition, and feeling functions. For the thinking functions, extroverted and introverted, the reason we call one form of thinking extroverted is because it's group thinking, apparently. And the reason we call introverted thinking introverted is because it's individualistic, independent thinking. So one's more perhaps original, and one is more willing to accept certain collectively regarded as accurate premises as facts, whereas TI is more epistemological. It's willing to catch you on the assumptions you make and then drill you down on those assumptions so that your assumptions are accurate. They're both functions that lend well to argument enhancement because they're all grounded. And so when I was in speech and debate, I know that most of those that I was in multiple speech and debate programs, but in high school, both my experiences in mock trial, in speech and debate, I was commonly around other dominant thinking types, and either extroverted or introverted thinkers. In a debate setting, either one of those, at least in the mock trial, either TI or TE would fare quite well. It's really difficult for me to say how they're different, per se. We can say, I do think that, here's the thing, right? So people think that MBTI is like astrology. I disagree. I think cognitive typology tries to categorize different ways of thinking. Okay, so do you agree? I'm gonna kind of engage in a little bit of cross-examining here. Do you agree that there are different ways of thinking, right? Yes. Do you agree that we can categorize different ways of thinking? Yes. Can we demonstrate that different ways of thinking exist? Yes. Would you define cognitive functions as different ways of thinking? Yes. And thus, you'd agree then that we can demonstrate that the cognitive functions are then real. If they're just different ways of thinking, we can document there are different ways of thinking, we can categorize them, we can demonstrate they exist. Therefore, if we're just defining cognitive functions as different ways of thinking, we can demonstrate that cognitive functions exist. And we have to essentialize these functions because, on these online forums and these online websites about TE and TI, it's like, well, the TI user is the scientist and the architect, and the TE user is the lawyer, the stat. Okay, these are all qualitative. They're attempting to attach qualities to the different ways of thinking, and they're not really thinking about them in essence. So that we're essentially categorizing by heuristics rather than definitions. That's not a good starting point. Heuristics, well, they're good enough for TE, depending on the argument, and they're never really good enough for TI. But it depends on how you define both. TE to me is a concern with utility, right? And to me, I've already talked about this. TE is logic applied to the aim of achieving real-world results. So you'll notice that TE is logic that is constrained by a utility concern, right? It explores theories. It's interested in theory. It's interested in ideas, but it takes a utility concerned approach to those ideas, right? It's empirical. I've discussed this in a previous video. It's evidence-based. Okay, so that idea is great. That theory is great. What do you have to back it up? That's TE's question. That's a good question. Because if you have nothing to back up your theory, I mean, I'm even TI preferring. I've been typed as TI absolute valuing, and I still ask that question. We have to, or else our theorizing is unconstrained. And that just leads to psychosis and a number of other bad conclusions that are purely speculative and really can't be brought into the real world in any actualizable idea or proposition. It's not to say that TI isn't good at that, but it's really not as concerned. It's logic that is not constrained by a utility concern. And It's not concerned really with the real world results aspect of things. It's not really concerned with how to efficiently navigate systems and navigate situations and apply tactile logic to or tactical logic to those situations. It's not so concerned with any gain. It's not. It doesn't have an accumulation mindset. It's not bound by utility concerns in the way that TE is. Yeah, TE says your theory is great. Where's your evidence? Okay, the logic works out. TE is as good at logic as TI, I think. There are distinctions made between TE and TI, and TE is TI better at conditional logic, all of that. I think TE is all about that too. But I think it's all logic, right? It's causal logic, it's conditional logic, philosophical logic, argumentation. All of this is TE and TI, right? They don't really engage. They don't really prefer any form of logic. They're just applying logic and thinking and fact concern and the intellect to the resolution of emotions, situations, ethical, economic, mathematical conflicts. I mean, they're just concerned. It's logic applied. It's the same, to me, it's the same logic applied to two separate things, right? So TE, it's the same logic really, to me anyway, as TI, but it's just applied to different fields and different occupations. And so TE has this utility concern underlying it, right? It wants to achieve something concrete. It wants to make progress in its thought, in its generation of mental output, and it wants to apply itself to perhaps rational pursuits in life. Both of these are very much preoccupied with the rational, with objectivity, with the difference between appearances and reality, between all these things. And one is not necessarily more intelligent than the other. If you're either, and I'll notice that there's a feedback loop between the two functions. If you're really good at one, although typical cognitive typology schemes for the types work out differently, you'll probably have some facility with the other, right? I mean, I think TI is a little bit, it's paired with a personality that's really not as constrained by utility concerns. So it goes a bit farther, and it goes in different directions in its examinations, and it goes to places that aren't necessarily, there's energy expended in TI that are not necessarily going to translate into any kind of real world result. But TI is no less useful. I mean, you've got to have TE checked by TI, and you have to have TI checked by TE. And really, it's the same thing. It's thinking, and that means logic, argumentation, concern with facts, concern with evidence. It's all kind of the same thing. They're just applied. So it's not a difference in essence. It's a difference in how the same thing is applied. And TE is applied to particular kinds of goals and ends. And TE is the same kind of process applied to, not necessarily applied to anything specific, right? So maybe they are different kinds of logic. Maybe, and this leads to and I think that saying that they're the same thing, either extroverted or introverted, is only to say that they are the same thing. They're thinking. It's just they're applied to different things. And as the individual with the thinking function dominant applies itself to different things, has different fundamental impulses and motivations, naturally their thinking is going to go in different directions. If you're a utility concerned person, you're concerned with making results in your thinking and coming to firm conclusions about things and being able to back things up to demonstrate them. Well, your thinking is going to go in a particular direction. It may not consider certain points. It may consider others. Whereas TI, it's often in personalities. If you're dominant TI, you're just concerned with the logic. And mostly in questioning, I mean, TE is much more likely to, take certain assumptions as valid, to build human useful conclusions, whereas TI is going to more nitpick your assumptions. Again, because for the utility concerned person, you're willing to make assumptions to generate a useful result, an actionable result. If you're not concerned with utility, right, you're going to question the assumptions more, right? So TE is really a person who's very focused on the generation. He is logical, but he is utility concerned, and so the direction of his thought is different than the TI person, which is logic. It's all logic. TE is logic constrained by utility concern, and TI is logic not constrained by utility concern. It's all about the utility concern. The thing is, people think this is like astrology. It's not. People are more or less utility concerned. They are more or less utilitarian. That's demonstrable. That's a personality preference and a personality trait. And if all we're defining TE as is utility concern, then TE exists, right? And if we can demonstrate that logic exists, then TI exists too. So don't act like this is some weird astrological system that has no substantive content. The thing is, most people that hurl this criticism don't even attempt to understand. They're TE users, in the sense that they're not willing to go into they don't really see much utility in it, so they write it off. It's TE, and a TI user is going to, oh, maybe I'll investigate that further, right? So probabilistically, TE says, that's more or less not likely to be useful to me. I'll write it off. TI is not really concerned with usefulness, or utility. They're going to consider validity more. So really, I think this is a great distinction. TE is concerned with utility. TI is concerned with validity, right? And both are concerned with, now that's just a simplification. I'm not saying that's the end-all, be-all distinction that clarifies the difference between the two functions, because clearly we can't do that with this type of a thing, which is why people write it off, because they're not really willing to fine-tune the definitions in the way that TI is. It's not to say that TE users won't be interested in it. Often they can be, that TE users are interested in gaining knowledge that then allows them to navigate the world with ever more tactical facility. And so, of course, MBTI is useful for that, if there's assumed validity in it, which, the TE user, if it's not so concerned with validity, it's just as likely to write it off as to accept it. I'm contradicting myself. So it's utility concern. If it recognizes the value in MBTI, it's gonna investigate. If it sees no value in it, it's the question of utility value. Different personalities have different weight utility considerations differently, and I think that's the difference between. I think that's why and why we have to use the words extroverted and introverted. Yeah, I think that's a Jungian thing, and I think that we could get rid of the introverted extroversion, designation. We don't have to use those words. I think it's good. I think they're sensible. Jungian. I mean, of course, you would. He's trying to string everything together in his NI kind of way, in a way that's philosophically interesting, and that's fine. But it's not very specific. What is even meant by extroverted thinking? How is thinking extroverted? It happens inside. How is any kind of thinking extroverted? It happens inside. If it's all happening inside, all thinking is introverted. Okay, so thought doesn't happen in speech. It happens inside. It's separate from speech. And you'll notice that because a lot of people will misspeak, and I'll probably have a couple times in this video anyway. So, yeah, it's not to say that one is going to be more talkative necessarily, just because it's extroverted thinking. I mean, often it's paired with a trait of extroversion, which is probably why it's utility concerned. Because if you're extroverted, you're probably a little bit more status conscious, and that leads you into domains of rationality that help you achieve your status goals, which is a basic human impulse. We all have that kind of status consciousness underlying everything. And I agree with Jordan Peterson. It's a fundamental neural circuitry that's satisfied in various ways. And we're always estimating each other's strengths and evaluating each other's weaknesses because we're all maximizers in that way. We're all utility concerned. TI less so, though. And that's what makes it a very unique individual. That's why I think TI users are generally just written off as you're lazy smart guys. It's you could most certainly have, it's a different kind of ambition. I mean, certainly the INTP, ISTP can be very ambitious people, but you're going to notice differences in how the ambitions of TE users and TI users manifest. Now, none of this even relates to the title of the video. And this is an insight. Now, this gets back, I've already defined the functions, but this is a little bit of a creative way to distinguish between them. Just drinking some tea there. Okay, it's their relationship with the shadow of doubt. Okay, so, in every mental endeavor, in every attempt to understand the world, in every attempt to present an argument or prove a thing, always there is this issue of the shadow of doubt, right? Have I proved this adequately? Is it probable? Is it logical? There's always this shadow of doubt there. Now, the thing is, when we're trying to prove anything and advance a conclusion and come to a crystallized demonstrable, evidentiarily and logically demonstrable understanding of things. We always have this relationship and we're interacting with the shadow of doubt. The thing is, TI is going to say with the shadow of doubt, I don't have to be beyond doubt. I just have to be beyond its shadow. Okay? With TE, I don't have to be completely beyond doubt. I just have to be beyond its shadow. It's got to be good enough, right? With TI, they're not as keen to say that, right? Yeah, TI is going to say, yeah, with the shadow of doubt. Yeah, I need to get beyond the shadow of doubt, but I've also ideally want to totally get beyond doubt. With TE recognizes with most humans, you don't have to be. You just have to be beyond the shadow of doubt. You don't have to be beyond all doubt, doubt itself, right? You just have to be beyond its shadow. With that's TE. And so it's willing to just kind of, it's again TI validity, TE utility. It's kind of willing to assume certain things that it regards as probable and go forward. And it's not to say that it will be more error prone in its thinking, depending on how specific its occupation and profession is. With TI, I kind of ideally want to be beyond doubt completely. I don't want to just be beyond its shadow. So it's a different relationship with resolving doubt, right? TE recognizes I'm only concerned with utility and a kind of achievement, rationality-oriented achievement in the world, like a profession, like a specialized technical profession. I don't need to be on. I don't need to be beyond doubt. I need to be beyond the shadow of doubt. That's good enough, right? And some may be more or less rigorous depending on the strength of their TI. And then TI is more like, well, I'd ideally want to be beyond doubt, not just beyond its shadow, right? So basically, in my thinking, even as TI preferring, I've come to the conclusion that I don't need to be beyond all doubt. I just need to be beyond shadow of doubt. And that's important because then I'm not paralyzed by the need to make inarguable propositions that are totally valid in the realm of pure logic. Yes, I do want them to be valid in that way, and will make them valid in that way with some hammering out. But I'm also, even as a TI preferring, I do still want to advance really, both demonstrable and logical conclusions in a way that makes the world ideally a better place. It's just kind of so, it's just TI applied to TI in the mind of a person with a different ambition. But that's an important thing about the shadow of doubt. And I think that this is where I'll end the video. We don't need to be beyond all doubt. We just need to be beyond its shadow. And we can never be, in terms of, if you've studied epistemology, we can never be beyond all doubt. We can only, but it's good enough, right? We don't need to be beyond all doubt. We just need to be beyond its shadow. If we can get that far, usually the conclusions and the logic will work in the world. We can consider epistemology further. Ultimately, I think epistemology and pure logic are both extremely necessary, extremely critically useful things that we all need to equip ourselves with. Calling it pure logic is stupid. I think it's just logic, and pure logic should be applied logic too. We need to apply pure logic because that enhances each one of our conclusions, each one of our arguments, and the whole world ultimately, because we make policies, we act based on logic. And so the more we can apply principles of logic, which prove themselves valid, then we're both better people and we create a better world. But it's just important to make the distinction, and I'll end the video here. You don't need to be beyond all doubt. You just need to be beyond the shadow of doubt. And that's where I'll end the video.